It seems like every day there's a new brand with a new EV. If you didn't already know it, Jeep has an EV on sale already. It's the Wagoneer S, but this is the EV they should have started with. It's the new Jeep Recon, and it's going to be on sale in 2026. Let's start with the Jeep things first, and then we'll get into the details. It's best to think of this as Wrangler meets Grand Cherokee. It's going to be the first trail-rated electric Jeep, and it's going to be the first electric vehicle by Jeep that does Jeep things, like have doors that come off. The only piece of glass that is fixed in this car, interestingly, is the windscreen right there, because we have a standard panoramic opening glass moonroof, or, as we're going to take a look at in a bit, we also have a canvas top. That's a really cool option. And even the rear windows come off the vehicle. So if you want that open-air off-roading experience, this is going to be the only electric vehicle in the United States to offer that to you right now. Now, let's take a look at the tires, because this is a big change from the Wagoneer S, with which this vehicle shares suspiciously quite a bit, but the tires are not one of them. We have Nexen all-terrain tires here, 265/70 R18 tire. It's not the most aggressive tire. It's not a Jeep Wrangler, Rubicon, or anything like that, but it is more aggressive than what we find on the Wagoneer S. Now, speaking of Wagoneer S, structurally, this shares a great deal with that model. It shares motors, shares battery packs and charging, and it shares the general structure. So this is a unibody electric vehicle. It's not sort of body-on battery or whatever you might want to call it. And that's maybe partially why we have these incredibly large hinges here. If you come in for a closer look, these stick out really quite far from the body. Jeep says that removing the doors here is going to be easier than in any vehicle they've ever produced. Basically, you open the door past its normal detent to about 90 degrees, and then you simply lift it off the vehicle. There are no bolts to remove, nothing like that. Although, I kind of wish they had given us some bolts to take off that hinge right there. Now, coming around to the rear, again, rear windows come off there, and you'll get something you don't find in most EVs, period. That is a full-size spare tire, clinging onto the back, sort of Jeep Wrangler style. I think this is a really, really good look. And this is really what separates this from its platform mate, the Wagoneer S. That has a much sleeker look. This has that boxy Jeep appearance. And again, kind of why I think this should have come first. With that boxy appearance comes, of course, a really practical cargo area. Now, pay no attention to the missing plastic panel there. They were rooting around trying to plug this in so that way the lights will stay on. But we have a pretty big and upright cargo area in the back. That's a big, big advantage of this over that sexier and sleeker Wagoneer S. Well, sleeker, I don't know about sexier. Anyway, down here at the bottom, we have the 2-inch hitch receiver because 3,300 pounds of towing capability is going to be standard. And we have 4-pin and 7-pin wiring harness connections. Kind of surprised it still says FCA, even though it hasn't been Fiat Chrysler for a while. Big recovery hooks right back there in the rear. And if we come over here to this little badge, you'll notice they're still calling this a 4xe. It's the Moab trim here, because that is going to be the off-road named trim for the new Recon. They're not going to be going Rubicon or Sahara. Now, things still remain to be seen, but as far as general corollaries go, I would say this is probably closer to the Sahara and the Wrangler lineup in terms of general capability than the Rubicon. And maybe that's why they've adopted a new naming scheme. Let's talk about the electronic bits, of course, because under the body we have basically the same just over 100 kilowatt-hour battery pack that we find in the Wagoneer S. It appears that there's extra protection under there. I haven't been able to get too deep in there, but we do have some big, big skid plates under there helping protect the underbody of the vehicle. It's going to be a dual motor design using the same front 335 horsepower motor that we find in the Wagoneer S and a very similar rear motor. The rear motor is also rated for 335 horsepower, but it has a much more aggressive final drive ratio. So instead of 11-to-1 up front, it has 15-to-1 in the rear, and it has an E-locker. That's another big difference. The last one is the ground clearance. We get 9.1 inches of ground clearance here, rather than just over 6 inches of ground clearance in the Wagoneer S. So definitely a very, very different beast. Now let's pop the hood and see what's going on in there, because this is going to have a front trunk, just like that other model. But it is on the small side, which is surprising, because the front end is so boxy and chunky and upright. I had expected something a little bit bigger than this, just sort of oversized pizza box, I guess you could say. It's about 3 cubic feet in storage capacity. You'll be able to fit your gym bag in there, maybe your charging adapter cables. When it comes to off-road capability, remember this is a unibody vehicle with an independent suspension, so it's probably going to feel a bit more like a Grand Cherokee, albeit a heavy Grand Cherokee, than a Wrangler. Let's talk about the angles. I want to get them right, so I'll refer to my notes here because we only have about 20 minutes with this Recon. We get a 33.8 degree approach angle, 33.1 departure angle, and 23.3 breakover angle. So pretty decent angles as far as something in that category goes. And here you can see what the opening in the back end is like if you take out that rear window. You can also see that they're pretty light, which I really appreciate as well. So they did make a lot of effort into making these panels just as light and durable as possible. This does not actually appear to be glass, it appears to be some sort of polycarbonate, but we can probably get details on that in a little bit. Now, the other thing you may notice from this angle, it's hard to see, but if you actually come on top, this is the canvas top that you'll be able to get in the Recon. And if I climb back up here again, you'll notice it opens all the way from the top, all the way back there, just about to the cargo area. So it's an enormous hole in the roof. That's possible because of the battery pack and the strengthening effect that it has on the vehicle generally. So it's definitely a positive feature. With this model up in the air, let's take a look underneath it so we can see some of the protection that we have for the drivetrain. We have a skid plate, it's hard to see, but it's right back there for the rear electric motor. We have the battery protection plate right there. And then we have another big steel plate up here in the front for the front electric motor module. And this is really nice and thick steel, so I do appreciate that, although keep in mind this is over 6,000 pounds of curb weight. Big suspension arms here, again, independent suspension. Up front, I am surprised that more of this lower body isn't a metal skid plate or a bash plate right here. This is actually a plastic bumper setup right there, plastic bumper there. We then get the radar module for the adaptive cruise control in that area. And again, those big recovery hooks which slot into these little rubbery sections here. Worried about weighting performance in your Recon? Don't worry, the battery pack and the motor units are completely sealed. 650 horsepower may sound excessive, and it probably is in real terms because this is definitely going to be really quick 0 to 60, but the reason we have that high horsepower ability is for off-roading. Because if you're on an off-road trail and one axle is the only one giving you traction, you only have 335 horsepower. That's why we have those big electric motors in this and other off-road dedicated vehicles. Let's talk about the driving and seating positions here because this is more upright than I had expected, and I kind of like that. I definitely prefer a more upright seating position, and if you do too, you're really going to like this over some of those other EVs out there. The downside to that is range. We're talking about 230 miles of driving range. Later, there may be a model with up to 255 miles or 250 miles of driving range, but you know, boxy with that big spare tire and the curb weight definitely takes a toll on range. But back here, I have tons of room. I'll scoot over so you can see what this looks like, but just check that out. Check out how much room I have in here thanks to that boxy profile. And you can also see just barely the opening of this fabric roof. What does surprise me is that unlike some of the fabric roofs we've seen in Jeeps and other vehicles before, this appears to be a multi-layered top, and it's going to collapse way back there over the cargo area. So it is a little bit more practical and I would say more daily driver livable than some canvas single layer tops. If I move over here to the middle seat, I have a reasonable amount of room, but there is a pretty noticeable hump right here. I don't know if it's hard to see there from that camera angle, but there is a pretty noticeable hump right in the middle, probably because of the mixed nature of this platform. It's not a dedicated EV platform. Now let's talk about charging. The numbers on your screen are basically the same ones as the Wagoneer S because same battery pack, same motors, and even the same charge connector is found right here as in the Wagoneer S. So CCS still, not J3400. It's worth noting that Stellantis has agreed to the future J3400 standard, but they haven't given us any dates as to when that might happen. We'll take a look at a model with doors on in a moment, but let's take a look at the dashboard first. This has the biggest screen that Jeep says they've ever put in a Jeep product, and I definitely believe it. It's just over 14 inches, and I like the layout. Now, I do not like the fact that they have moved some of the climate controls over here to the screen rather than having them as physical buttons. So if you love physical buttons, you're going to want to look at another Jeep. The rest of the product, though, it's pretty similar to other Uconnect 5 implementations. We have navigation there, factory navigation if the software had been activated there properly. This is an early pre-production prototype, so not all the software is complete yet. But nice big screen. It's going to have a big implementation of smartphone projection as well. Big air vents right there, hazard light buttons. We have some physical buttons here for various vehicle functions. You'll notice that we don't have any bank of window and door switches because no windows and doors on here at the moment. We have a power button right there, auto brake hold, Qi wireless charging mat, some big cup holders there, and kind of an homage to the Wrangler, we have this red control section where we have our drive mode selector and a button for our e-locker in the back. Now moving over to the driver's side, we have a Squircle style steering wheel. I think this is a pretty attractive look. I kind of hope we see this on other Jeep models in the future. The buttons are very similar to other Jeeps though, and their functionality. So this controls that multi-function LCD cluster. Again, keep in mind this is a very early pre-production car, so a lot of this isn't quite right in the software yet, but expect the functionality to be pretty similar to other Jeep models. We have adaptive cruise control controls over here on this side. Now let's take a look at that big canvas roof in operation. This has to be one of the coolest features you can buy in an EV today. And I'll open it all the way so you can really see where that roof goes, because that is what is most interesting for me about this. The opening that you see inside is actually the entire opening for the roof. You can see right here that the roof bunches up right back here on top of the cargo area, but that means that the rear passengers actually have that complete open sky view without some sort of bar going on in the middle. So definitely very, very different than what we find in the Wrangler. Taking a closer look at the seats, we have two-way adjustable lumbar support there for the driver. Controls, of course, on the seat itself. And then these are leather upholstered seats with heating and ventilation. On the dashboard, there's a ton of additional storage space. We have a little storage cubby right there. There's going to be a rail on the dashboard so you can mount accessories. There's also a tiny little storage cubby there. There's a big grab handle for the passenger, another storage area under the center console, and we have a teeny tiny bin-style glove compartment. I don't think you'd be able to fit a larger tablet computer inside, but the passenger seat has the same range of motion as the driver's seat. Here's what the doors look like when they're on the vehicle. One thing to note is that while we have a lot of soft touch materials, generally speaking, in the cabin, we don't have a lot of soft touch materials on the doors because that would actually make them heavier. We have two-position seat memory over there. We have the window switches and the door lock buttons over here on the doors, not on the center console. Again, logical because if the door's off, you don't need them. We have one wiring harness connection. That is what you have to undo to take off the door. You then unlatch that little pin right there, and then you just simply pull the door off. They then have this little retention mechanism over here on the doors. These are actually unboltable, so those are functional screws right there. You can take them off and you can bolt whatever other accessory on there you might want to later. Before we get to pricing, let's dive into some of the other critical numbers. Even though this is boxier than the existing Wagoneer S, it's interestingly almost exactly the same size. We have basically the same 112.9-inch wheelbase. That's, of course, the distance between the front wheel and that back wheel there. It's just 1/10 of an inch smaller than the Wagoneer S. That's probably just a rounding error, to be honest. It has a body width that is exactly the same size, but the body does get wider because of these mirrors here. This is where I'm really interested in the way that Jeep has done these detachable doors, because we have a 360-degree camera setup right there, as you can see with that camera there, blinkers in the mirrors, power adjustable mirrors, memory linked mirrors, etc. But they actually come off with the door, which is definitely pretty cool. Now, the body itself is about the same length as the Wagoneer S, but that does seem to include the spare tire. So the body itself is probably a little bit shorter than the Wagoneer S, and that's part of how we get to those better clearance numbers because that spare tire is tucked up nice and high. But we also have extra curb weight. This is going to come in at 6,112 pounds, which is almost as heavy as the Wagoneer in Jeep's lineup, which is their full-size SUV. Now let's talk pricing. It's going to start at $66,995 at the start. That is going to be for the Moab trim. There are going to be a few things that are optional, including that canvas roof there, if you're interested in that. There are probably also going to be less expensive versions in the future. That does appear to be a little bit less expensive than Wagoneer S at the moment, but it's definitely more expensive than something like a Wrangler Sahara, which gets up to about $55,000 or so currently. I'm pretty sure that Jeep was definitely hoping that the tax credit would kick on, and that, of course, is part of the problem, I would say, for the Recon. It's not going to get a tax credit because nothing is getting a tax credit anymore. I am really intrigued, though, by the removable door design. That's something I just wish a lot of companies would do because it does add a feel that we don't find in other off-roaders. And there's a lot of practicality going on in here because we have a more usable rear seat because of that really boxy and upright design. So passengers in the back that are taller or longer legged or those rear-facing child seats, they're going to fit in here better. And that cargo area in the back being really upright and square is also a big, big advantage. Let me know what you think about this, and is this the EV that Jeep should have started with, or is the 230-mile driving range a bit of a problem? Now, I know a lot of people are going to make fun of that and say, hey, Rivians have longer driving ranges, and that is definitely true, but there's no Rivian quite like this. That full-size spare tire is definitely a big differentiator here. The tires that we find on here are also a bit of a differentiator, and the general chunky size of this is a big difference as well. Unfortunately, none of that leads to excellent fuel efficiency numbers, and that is why we see the efficiency numbers on here that we don't find in the Wagoneer S, because the Wagoneer S with the same battery pack will get this same battery over 300 miles in the real world. This one, yeah, it's going to be about 70 to 80 miles less.